A reading from the book of the prophet Jeremiah. Thus says the Lord, "Shout with joy for Jacob, exult at the head of the nations. Proclaim your praise and say, the Lord has delivered his people, the remnant of Israel. Behold, I will bring them back from the land of the north. I will gather them from the ends of the world, with the blind and the lame in their midst, the mothers and those with child. They shall return as an immense throng. They departed in tears, but I will console them and guide them. I will lead them to brooks of water on a level road, so that none shall stumble. For I am a father to Israel. Ephraim is my firstborn." The word of the Lord. I think there are two key themes from this reading that pertain to discernment: faith and mercy. First, faith. Why faith? Well, this reading seems like a very joyful proclamation. God is telling good news here. But what is really interesting is the context. That when God is telling the people about what he's going to do, they're actually at their lowest point. The temple has been destroyed. The people are in exile in a foreign land. Everything they know is gone. And so what Jeremiah is doing is proclaiming this hopeful message in the midst of wreckage. And he wants, what does the Lord say? "Shout with joy for Jacob, exult at the head of the nations, proclaim your praise." And the only way this is possible is with faith. There's another point in Jeremiah's letter, or the book of Jeremiah, where he says, "From the Lord, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to help you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future." And that's what's being echoed in our reading today. But it's only possible for those words to be consoling with faith, because at this point in time, there is no earthly way that Israel is ever going to get back to its homeland, that the temple is going to be rebuilt, that they will have the glory that they once knew. And this is important for discernment as well. You have to have faith. You have to believe that God, A, has a plan for you, and B, is on your side, and C, that that plan is going to bring you joy. And that's sort of the paradox of the Christian life, because along the way, it's going to seem like God is asking you to pick up your crosses, to deal with difficult family issues, to have to give up dreams of possible marriage if that's where you're called. And these are difficult things. But if that is where your heart is being led, have the peace knowing that God will bring about his glory in you in time. And you're not going to see it in the moment, but it'll come. And I don't mean just in the sort of great beyond, when you see the great white light and all your questions are answered and everything is jolly and good. Even in this life, you get to see it if you are faithful. And I told the Come and Seers today about my own vocation story and the obstacles I encountered, the difficulty of persevering in answering the call that I thought I had, despite great family opposition, parental opposition, and the great grief that created for me. But in finally surrendering, you get to see what God has in store. And two brief experiences I'll share. One, this summer, making solemn vows to, after not only discerning a call for 4 years, but being in Dominican life for 6 years, and to finally be able to put my hands in the hands of the provincial, Father Charlie, and pledge obedience until death, was really moving. But not quite as moving as receiving Holy Communion after that. And I went up and I received communion from his hands and went back to my pew and just broke down crying. Why? Because after all this time, I had finally been able to give myself back in solemn vows to God until death. That what Jesus had given to me in the Eucharist, I was able to repay in some small way with the gift of myself. And to be accepted, to be loved, well, You see why God put me through all the difficulties because of that, for the joy of finally being able to give. But the understanding that springs from faith started even earlier. Actually, when I was on a come and see, my first come and see, the only one I went to before I applied, I went to the cathedral, as many of you did today, and I encouraged a lot of you to go so that you would have a setting for this story. So to the right of the main altar at the cathedral, there's this beautiful chapel, Eucharistic chapel. And I remember when I was taken in on my tour and we looked around, oh, very pretty and lovely, and then everyone else was leaving. And this was at the end of 4 years of discernment, and I was so thankful that I found a place that I felt at home at, that I felt Dominican life was being lived out, that I had finally gotten to where I was supposed to be. And I was very grateful, very happy, very joyful, very at peace. So everyone else leaves, and I kneel down to pray and to say a little prayer of thanksgiving because I'm just so grateful. And I think, well, that's what we should do. As Jeremiah says, proclaim your praise. So I kneel down, and in an instant, the happiness just drained out of me, just disappeared. And I saw, how people see their life flash before their eyes? Well, I saw my vocational journey flash before my eyes in an instant. And I saw not all the steps I had taken, not all the prayers I had said, but the obstacles I had put up, the lies I had told myself, the times I had put off thinking about it, all the difficulties and all the barriers I'd put in God's way, the bargains I had struck. And I was just sort of overwhelmed by this, sort of trail of infidelity, and God finally bringing me to this point. And I heard very clearly inside of me a voice say, "See how patient I have been with you. See how patient I have been with you." And it was overwhelming, not out of fear, but out of love, that God could love so much, that he would be so patient. But again, it's a journey of faith. And that understanding only comes after the final surrender, after I had finally said, yes, God, I found my home. Only then did I get this crucial insight. The second word or theme that comes from our reading today from Jeremiah is mercy. And this is an unusual word that we don't normally think about with vocational discernment. We think about joy, we think about being fruitful, we think about giving our lives, we think about being called. We don't think about mercy. But I was struck in the passage from Jeremiah today. God says, "I will gather them from the ends of the world with the blind and the lame in their midst, the mothers and those with child. They shall return as an immense throng." And what struck me is that in the body, you imagine the body of people sort of crossing back into Israel just as they came out of Egypt, this huge mass. And it says, in their midst, in the middle of them, the blind and the lame, mothers, those with children. And you think of, these are populations that, were oftentimes at the mercy of others. Women, especially pregnant women, very, very vulnerable. But even more so, the blind and the lame who wouldn't be able to, work for a living to supply food for themselves. And yet they're brought back in the midst of this community, which means the community itself has to have mercy on them, has to provide for them, just as God has. And so when you think about vocational discernment, it's good to think about what gives you joy, what brings you happiness, what brings you peace. But also I want you to think about, where do I want to show mercy and where do I want to be shown mercy? And what this means on a practical level is, where am I willing to be annoyed? Where am I willing to be frustrated? Where am I willing to put up with difficulties for a long time? Where am I willing to accept challenges? Because when you're at your worst, you're going to need mercy. And when other people are at their worst, you're going to need to give it. And you need to decide what community that's going to be. Is it going to be in a cloistered contemplative community? Is it going to be with friars? Is it going to be with one other person in holy matrimony? You have to pick a community in some sense. You want to be a parish priest. That's going to be your community. But everywhere you go, you're going to need mercy. And that's something that we're reminded of as Dominicans when we make our vows. The provincial asks us, what do you seek? And the answer is, God's mercy and yours. Where do we want to struggle to grow in the love of God? And in that mercy, in giving and receiving it, we're going to find holiness and we're going to find joy. But we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that if we find the right vocation, it's going to be all beer and Skittles, because it's not. It's going to be difficult. But we need to have confidence in Jeremiah's words from the Lord. I know the plans I have for you, plans to help you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And we should pray as John Henry Cardinal Newman prayed, lead on, kindly light.